It all started with a message, a cryptic email from an anonymous sender that found its way into Alex's inbox late one night. The subject line was simple, "Are you brave enough?" But it was the contents of the email that truly piqued his curiosity. Deep in the woods, there lies an asylum forgotten by time. No one remembers it, no one talks about it, and it doesn't exist on any map. But if you're daring enough to find it, you'll uncover secrets no one else has dared to reveal. Are you ready to face what's hidden within? Alex's heart raced as he read the message. As an urban explorer with a YouTube channel dedicated to exploring abandoned places, he had seen his share of creepy, derelict buildings, but this sounded like something different, something truly thrilling. He forwarded the email to his group, Eric, Lena, Dave, and Mia. They had been friends for years, united by their shared passion for exploration and the thrill of the unknown. Within minutes, the replies came flooding in. "I'm in. This sounds insane. Eric, we have to do this. When do we leave? Lena, this place could be the mother lode. Imagine the views." Dave. Mia was the only one who hesitated, replying, "This feels off. Are we sure this is legit?" But Alex's excitement was infectious, and soon, even Mia was convinced. The group set a date for the trip, packed their gear, and prepared for what they believed would be their greatest adventure yet. The journey to the asylum was fraught with obstacles. The directions provided in the email were vague, almost as if they were meant to mislead. The group spent hours driving through winding, forested roads, following faint trails that led them deeper into the woods. By the time they finally reached the asylum, it was dusk. The building loomed ahead, half hidden by the thick trees and creeping vines that seemed to have a life of their own. It was an imposing structure, its Gothic architecture casting long shadows across the forest floor. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and a heavy silence hung in the air, as if the very forest was holding its breath. "Whoa, this place is massive," Eric whispered, his voice tinged with awe. The building was in a state of disrepair, with broken windows and crumbling walls, yet it seemed oddly preserved, as if time had forgotten to erode it completely. There was no graffiti, no signs of previous explorers, nothing to indicate that anyone had set foot here in years. "This is it," Alex said, his voice filled with anticipation. "This is going to be epic." They unloaded their gear, including cameras, flashlights, and other essentials, and made their way toward the entrance. The heavy wooden doors creaked loudly as they pushed them open, revealing a dark, cavernous hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. "Let's stick together," Lena suggested, her voice echoing off the walls. "We don't know what's in here." They moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. The interior was as eerie as the exterior, long corridors lined with decaying wallpaper, rooms filled with rusted medical equipment, and the occasional gust of wind that sent shivers down their spines. As they ventured deeper into the asylum, they began to notice strange things. The walls were covered in old, yellowed newspaper clippings and medical records, but the headlines were bizarre. "Doctor missing after experiment goes wrong." "Patients disappear without a trace. Mysterious deaths plague asylum." "What the hell happened here?" Mia muttered, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know, but this place is creeping me out," Dave admitted. "Let's get the footage we need and get out." But as they continued to explore, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, and the air grew colder with each step they took. The first real sign that something was terribly wrong came when they entered what appeared to be the main ward. The room was vast, with rows of rusted beds and decaying medical equipment scattered haphazardly. The walls were lined with tall, narrow windows that allowed just enough light to cast eerie shadows across the floor. Lena was the first to notice it. "Guys, do you hear that?" They all stopped, straining to listen. At first, there was nothing but silence, but then, faintly, they heard it. A low, almost imperceptible whisper, like the sound of someone murmuring just out of earshot. "What is that?" Eric asked, his voice barely above a whisper. They followed the sound, which seemed to be coming from a small room at the far end of the ward. As they approached, the whispering grew louder, but the words were still indistinct, like a recording played backward. With a shaky hand, Alex pushed the door open. The room was small and cramped, with a single bed in the center. The sheets were stained and tattered, but it was what lay on the bed that made them all gasp in horror. There, lying motionless on the bed, was a body, or rather, what remained of one. The figure was skeletal, its skin stretched tight over its bones, its eye sockets empty and hollow. But it was the expression on the face that was most disturbing, a look of sheer terror frozen in death. "Oh my God," Mia whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "We need to get out of here." But as they turned to leave, the whispering grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from the walls now, from the very air around them, and it was no longer just a murmur. It was a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once, their words a jumbled mess of fear and pain. The door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside the room. Panic set in as they realized they were not alone. The shadows in the corners of the room began to move, taking on the shape of figures that seemed to be watching them with hollow, soulless eyes. "Open the door," Dave shouted, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The figures moved closer, their whispers growing louder, filling the room with a deafening roar. The group huddled together, their backs against the wall, as the figures closed in on them, their faces twisted in expressions of anguish and rage. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whispering stopped. The figures vanished, leaving the room silent once more. The door creaked open on its own, and the group stumbled out into the hallway, their hearts pounding in their chests. They were shaken, but unharmed, physically at least. "We need to leave," Lena said, her voice trembling. "Now." But as they made their way back to the entrance, they realized with growing horror that the asylum was not done with them yet. The walls seemed to close in around them, the corridors twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. Every step they took seemed to lead them deeper into the building, further away from the safety of the outside world. It didn't take long for the group to realize they were trapped. No matter which way they turned, the hallways seemed to loop back on themselves, leading them in endless circles. The asylum was toying with them, its layout changing with each step, as if the building itself was alive. "None of this makes sense," Eric shouted, frustration and fear lacing his voice. "We've been through this corridor 3 times already." "But how?" Lena asked, her voice trembling. "It doesn't make any sense." "Forget making sense," Alex said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We need to find a way out." But the asylum had other plans. The whispering returned, more insistent now, accompanied by the sound of footsteps that didn't belong to any of them. The group quickened their pace, but no matter how fast they moved, the footsteps seemed to follow, always just a few paces behind. Then came the visions. At first, they were fleeting. Glimpses of figures standing in doorways, shadows that moved when they shouldn't. But soon, the visions became more vivid, more terrifying. Lena was the first to see it. As they passed a large, shattered mirror in one of the hallways, she caught sight of her reflection, or what she thought was her reflection. The face staring back at her was hers, but twisted in agony, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. She gasped and stumbled back, nearly dropping her flashlight. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice shaking. "See what?" Eric asked, looking back at her. "The mirror," Lena began, but when she looked again, the image was gone, replaced by her normal reflection. Never mind. But the asylum wasn't finished with them. As they continued to move through the building, the visions became more frequent. Each member of the group saw something different. Mia saw a patient in a straitjacket crawling toward her on the floor, its face obscured by a mass of tangled hair. Eric saw a nurse standing at the end of a corridor, her eyes bleeding as she whispered his name. And then there were the sounds, screams, sobs, the clatter of metal against metal. It was as if the asylum was replaying the horrors that had taken place within its walls, forcing the group to experience the pain and suffering of those who had been trapped here before them. "We need to get out of here," Mia cried, tears streaming down her face. "Please, we have to find a way out." But the asylum wasn't about to let them go so easily. The building was a labyrinth, its corridors shifting and changing with every step they took. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, as if the very structure was feeding off their fear. As the group wandered aimlessly through the asylum, they stumbled upon an old locked door at the end of a narrow hallway. The door was different from the others, thicker, reinforced with iron and covered in strange, unfamiliar symbols. "Do you think there's something behind there?" Dave asked, eyeing the door warily. "There's only one way to find out," Alex replied, his curiosity outweighing his fear. Using a crowbar they had brought with them, they pried the door open, revealing a dark, descending staircase. The air that wafted up from below was cold and musty, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of death. "Whatever's down there, it's been there a long time," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. They hesitated, but with no other options, they began their descent. The stairs creaked under their weight, the darkness swallowing them whole as they moved deeper underground. At the bottom, they found themselves in a large, dimly lit chamber. The walls were lined with old, dusty shelves filled with medical records, jars of preserved organs, and other macabre artifacts. In the center of the room was a large metal table stained with blood. But it was what lay beyond the table that truly horrified them, a series of large glass tanks filled with murky liquid. Floating inside each tank were the preserved bodies of what appeared to be patients who had been subjected to unspeakable experiments. "Oh my God!" Mia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What the hell happened here?" The answer came in the form of an old, leather-bound journal they found on a nearby shelf. The journal belonged to Dr. Elias Thorne, the head physician of the asylum. As they read through the entries, the horrifying truth was revealed. Dr. Thorne had been conducting experiments on the patients, experiments that involved the use of dark, forbidden rituals. He believed that by merging science with the occult, he could unlock the secrets of immortality. But the experiments had gone horribly wrong, resulting in the deaths of countless patients. Their souls, trapped and tormented, had become bound to the asylum, unable to find peace. The whispering, the visions. "It's them," Lena whispered, her face pale with fear. "The patients. They're still here." And then they heard it, a low, guttural growl emanating from the shadows at the far end of the chamber. The group froze, their eyes widening in terror as a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Dr. Thorne, or what remained of him. His body was grotesquely twisted and deformed, a monstrous fusion of man and something far worse. His eyes burned with a malevolent fire as he moved toward them, his voice a low, rasping whisper. "You should not have come here." Panic set in as the group scrambled to find a way out. Dr. Thorne advanced on them, his twisted form moving with unnatural speed. The walls of the chamber seemed to close in, the air growing thick with the stench of decay. "Run!" Alex shouted, pushing the others toward the stairs. But as they reached the base of the stairs, the door above them slammed shut, trapping them inside the chamber. Dr. Thorne was almost upon them, his eyes glowing with a hellish light. "We're trapped!" Dave cried, his voice laced with terror. Desperation took hold as the group frantically searched for another exit. It was Lena who noticed the small, rusted grate in the floor, just large enough for them to crawl through. "Over here," she called, yanking the grate open. One by one, they squeezed through the narrow opening, the sound of Dr. Thorne's growls growing louder behind them. The tunnel was dark and claustrophobic, but it was their only hope. They crawled for what felt like an eternity, the sound of Dr. Thorne's pursuit echoing in their ears. But just as they were about to lose hope, they saw it, a faint light at the end of the tunnel. With renewed determination, they pushed forward, emerging into the cool night air. They had made it out of the asylum, but they were far from safe. The forest around them was eerily silent, the trees looming overhead like dark sentinels. The group wasted no time, sprinting through the woods, their only thought being to put as much distance between themselves and the asylum as possible. But the asylum wasn't done with them yet. As they ran, they could hear the whispering, faint at first, but growing louder with each step they took. The voices of the patients, desperate for release, followed them through the woods, a haunting reminder of the horrors they had witnessed. Finally, they reached the road where they had parked their van. Without a second thought, they piled inside, Alex behind the wheel. He started the engine, and they sped away, not daring to look back. It took days for the group to recover from their ordeal. They tried to put the experience behind them, but the memories of the asylum haunted their every waking moment. They couldn't escape the feeling that they had left something behind, something that wasn't ready to let them go. And then, one by one, they began to disappear. It started with Eric. He was the first to go missing, vanishing from his apartment without a trace. His belongings were left untouched, his car still parked outside. The only clue was a single blood-stained note left on his bed with the words, "I'm sorry," scrawled across it. Next was Lena. She disappeared while on a late-night walk, her phone found abandoned on the sidewalk, still recording. The last thing it captured was the sound of faint whispering, followed by a blood-curdling scream. Mia was the third to go. Her friends found her lying in bed, her eyes wide open, her face frozen in an expression of sheer terror. The cause of death was unknown, but the autopsy revealed something chilling. Her heart had stopped as if she had been scared to death. Finally, there was Alex. He had tried to move on, but the guilt weighed heavily on him. He blamed himself for what had happened, for leading his friends into the nightmare that had claimed their lives. One night, unable to bear it any longer, he returned to the asylum. He walked through the dark, empty halls, the whispering growing louder with each step. The asylum had taken everything from him, his friends, his sanity, his very soul. And now it was calling him back. In the end, he found himself standing in the chamber where it had all begun, the glass tank still filled with the preserved bodies of the patients. Dr. Thorne was there, waiting for him, his twisted form bathed in the eerie glow of the tanks. "You belong to me now," Dr. Thorne whispered, his voice filled with a sickening satisfaction. And as Alex's screams echoed through the asylum, the walls closed in around him, sealing his fate. The asylum had claimed another soul, and the whispering continued, a never-ending chorus of pain and suffering.